So right now, there is this single Dutch company, and they hold an absolute unbreakable monopoly on the machines that actually manufacture the world's most advanced microchips.
Yeah, and we're talking about the chips that power, your smartphone, the AI in your laptop, even the navigation systems in your car.
Exactly. And if that one company just decided to stop shipping its machines tomorrow, I mean, the entire global tech industry would basically freeze.
Oh, instantly. It would be a complete standstill.
Right. And for decades, we didn't really think about this stuff. We didn't care where things were made or who controlled the choke points, as long as the end product was cheap and arrived on time.
Yeah, the supply lines were just sort of invisible.
But suddenly, those invisible lines have hardened into frontline borders.
It's a massive structural awakening, really. That feeling that the rules of the game have just suddenly changed. That is exactly what businesses, policymakers, and frankly, ordinary consumers are grappling with right now.
We are basically witnessing the end of a very specific era of human history.
We really are.
And unpacking that shift is our mission for this deep dive. Today, we have a stack of 4 highly detailed scholarly sources to go through.
Some really heavy hitters in here, too.
Oh, definitely. We're looking at cutting-edge analyses from the Journal of International Business Policy, alongside some expert commentaries from leading political scientists and international legal scholars.
Right, and on the surface, these sources cover 4 completely distinct topics.
Yeah, we've got global trade policy, the changing structure of corporate supply chains, the rise of competing geopolitical blocs, and the sudden, dramatic watering down of European sustainability laws.
Which sounds like 4 different deep dives, honestly.
It does.
Yes.
But the goal of our deep dive today is to show you how these 4 distinct pieces of the puzzle actually interlock.
Exactly. Because when you synthesize all these analyses, they point to one undeniable conclusion: the unraveling of the post-Cold War liberal international order.
Wow.
Yeah. For the last 40 years, economics led politics. If a process was cheap and efficient, you did it, and the politicians mostly just, stayed out of the way.
Right.
Today, that dynamic has violently flipped. Politics now trumps economics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if politics is now driving the bus right over economics, that means multinational businesses and you as a consumer are having to navigate a fragmented, hyper-politicized landscape.
Yeah, the old ideas of efficiency and comparative advantage, they've been replaced.
Replaced by what exactly?
By national security, supply chain resilience, and just raw ideological competition.
So how did we get here? How did we transition from a stable, multilateral trade order to today's environment where every microchip is like a geopolitical weapon?
Well, to understand the mechanics of that shift, we really have to look at the death of what international economists call the establishment narrative.
The establishment narrative.
Right. For decades, the dominant, unquestioned view in Western capitals was that globalization was a pure win-win scenario.
The old comparative advantage theory.
Exactly. It dictated that if every country just focused on what it did best and traded for the rest, the global economic pie would just keep expanding.
Right. Even if a manufacturing town lost its factory to overseas competition, the narrative was always, well, the government will just retrain those workers for the service sector.
Yeah, and everyone would benefit from cheaper consumer goods in a more peaceful, interconnected world.
Okay, and just a flag for you listening, our sources analyze how that narrative broke down by looking at political pressures from all sides.
Yeah, they really cover the whole spectrum.
They do. They examine everything from the protectionist tariffs championed by Donald Trump to left-wing critiques regarding corporate monopolies and wealth inequality.
Right.
And we want to be absolutely clear that we aren't here to pick political sides or endorse any of these specific policies today. We're just looking at the source material impartially to understand how these wildly different politically charged pressures effectively shattered the old consensus.
That's a crucial distinction because analytically speaking, those pressures have birthed a totally new framework. We've moved from a singular focus on free trade to what the sources call a multi-purpose trade policy.
Right, purpose trade policy. Okay.
Right. Yeah, and this new policy is shifting along 4 key dimensions. We're looking at purposes, partners, products, and tools.
So under the old system, the purpose was solely economic efficiency, right?
Exactly. And the partners were virtually everyone in the World Trade Organization. The products covered everything from agriculture to electronics.
And the primary tool was just the broad, multilateral free trade agreement.
Spot on. But the sources show that every single one of those dimensions has been completely rewritten today.
Completely.
Completely. Today, the purposes of trade policy include protecting national security, reviving domestic manufacturing, and fighting climate change.
That is a lot to juggle.
It is. And the partners are now heavily restricted to trusted geopolitical allies. There's this new concept they call friendshoring.
Friendshoring, I like that.
Yeah. And the tools are no longer broad agreements, but a chaotic mix of export controls, massive domestic subsidies, and strict investment screening.
Okay, but what about the products dimension? Because I want to zoom in on that, since one of the sources uses a brilliant analogy to explain how this works in practice.
Oh, the garden chair versus EVs?
Yes, the garden chair versus electric vehicles. This completely proves that the one-size-fits-all trade policy is dead.
It really does.
Think about a plastic garden chair. No government on Earth cares where a garden chair is manufactured.
No, of course not.
A garden chair doesn't threaten national security, it doesn't process data, and it doesn't require rare earth metals.
It just sits on your patio.
Right. So the old rules of free trade still apply perfectly to garden chairs. But an electric vehicle, an EV hits every single raw nerve of the 21st century.
What's fascinating here is that it's the ultimate flashpoint. An EV represents massive domestic manufacturing potential, which politicians desperately want for job creation.
Obviously.
It's also the centerpiece of climate change mitigation, but, building them requires critical minerals like lithium and cobalt.
Which exposes massive supply chain vulnerabilities if a rival nation controls those resources.
Exactly. Furthermore, modern EVs are essentially supercomputers on wheels. They map streets in real time, record audio, sync with smartphones, and transmit data back to servers.
Which instantly transforms a car into a massive national security and espionage liability?
Precisely. You cannot apply the garden share trade rules to a data harvesting supercomputer.
All right.
So governments just throw out the free trade playbook. Instead, they use that chaotic new toolkit we mentioned.
Slapping prohibitive tariffs on rival EVs, pouring billions in subsidies into domestic battery plants.
And legally blocking foreign entities from buying into the sector. They aren't just managing trade anymore, they are weaponizing it.
Wow. But if governments are suddenly treating cars and microchips like national security threats, countries can't just operate as lone wolves, right?
Yeah, not at all.
Because if you are going to slap tariffs on a rival and lock down your own mineral supply, you need backup. You need allies.
Absolutely.
And that causal chain is what's driving the second massive shift in our sources, the geographical fracturing of the globe.
Yeah, we are seeing a totally new geography of business. It's being divided into powerful geoeconomic blocks.
Geoeconomic blocks.
Right. And the sources point specifically toward the emergence of a bipolar world, a U.S.-aligned bloc and a China-aligned bloc.
Okay.
And this completely rewrites how international businesses calculate distance. Historically, a company measured distance geographically or maybe culturally, but today, distance is discontinuous.
Discontinuous distance. That sounds like a physics concept or something. What does it actually mean for a business?
It basically means physical proximity is irrelevant if the politics don't align.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, a manufacturing plant might be geographically located just across a border, like a 2-hour drive away.
Right.
But if that plant sits inside a rival political bloc, the tariffs, export controls, and data privacy laws make it infinitely distant.
You literally cannot legally trade certain technologies with them.
Exactly. The geographical map is being overwritten by an invisible, highly restrictive political map.
Okay, let me stop you there. Because when I read about a U.S. bloc and a China bloc in the sources, my immediate reaction is, isn't this just Cold War 2.0?
That's what a lot of people say.
Because it sounds exactly like the old standoff between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
But the sources highlight a critical difference this time around, specifically regarding the non-aligned countries.
Right, the ones caught in the middle.
Yeah. In 1961, during the original Cold War, the non-aligned nations, the ones refusing to pick a side, made up roughly 3% of global GDP. They were basically marginal players economically.
Right, 3% is nothing.
But today, the non-aligned powers, which include the European Union and India, make up over 20% of global GDP.
That is a huge shift.
Mm.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's tempting to look at that 20% and assume these non-aligned blocs hold all the cards now.
Because they have massive economic gravity.
Exactly. They don't have military supremacy, but economically they are massive. However, walking that tightrope is incredibly dangerous. Well, they want to play the two superpowers against each other to extract the best trade terms. But one political misstep, and they face crippling sanctions from both Washington and Beijing.
Ouch. But when they do walk the tightrope successfully, they wield bizarre amounts of power. Let's go back to the hook we started with that Dutch company, ASML.
Oh, yeah, the
Oh,
perfect example.
they sit within the European Union, a technically non-aligned bloc in this specific tech war, and they hold a monopoly on extreme ultraviolet, or EUV, lithography.
And to understand the leverage here, you have to understand the mechanism of that technology.
It's wild.
It really is. ASML doesn't just make regular machines. EUV lithography involves using lasers to blast droplets of tin into plasma.
Wait, they blast tin into plasma?
Yeah, literally into plasma, which then emits ultraviolet light. And that light is bounced off mirrors, polished to the atomic level to draw circuit patterns on silicon that are smaller than a single virus.
That is physics bordering on magic.
It really is. And it took ASML decades and billions of dollars to perfect it. There is no alternative supplier anywhere on the planet.
Meaning, neither the United States nor China can manufacture top-tier AI or military microchips without relying on a company located in a non-aligned bloc.
Right. And that proves how complex this new geography is. ASML, as an outsider, essentially holds a veto over the technological progress of both superpowers.
Wow.
It creates a wild scenario where non-aligned entities can negotiate access to both the U.S. and Chinese sandboxes, extracting better terms than the companies sitting safely inside those superpowers.
And for you listening, this isn't just high-level geopolitical theory. This translates directly to the devices in your pocket.
Absolutely it does.
Depending on your country's political alignment, the cost, availability, and capability of everything from your smartphone to your laptop are being quietly rewired by these invisible borders.
Yeah, if you buy a device, you might be legally locked out of certain software ecosystems or replacement parts simply because of the geopolitical bloc your nation belongs to.
Which perfectly explains the third major transition in our source material, because the macro-level fracturing of the globe forces a micro-level reversal in how these multinational companies actually build themselves from the inside out.
Yeah, they have to adapt. If the world map is now a minefield of unpredictable tariffs and export bans, a company can no longer rely on the classic flat world supply chain.
Right, the old model where a product's components crossed 6 different international borders, assembled by 4 different contractors before it was finally finished.
That highly fragmented, lean model is dead for strategic industries.
Completely dead.
The political risk is simply unacceptable now. If just one of those 6 borders closes, your entire company halts production.
So what are they doing instead?
The sources highlight a dramatic shift toward vertical reintegration. Companies are pulling every step of the process back under their own direct control.
Oh, like BYD?
Exactly. Look at the Chinese company BYD, which recently became the world's largest EV manufacturer. They don't operate like a traditional car company that just buys parts and assembles them.
No, they own everything.
They own the lithium mines, they process the raw minerals, they engineer their own batteries, they manufacture their own semiconductors.
Didn't they even start buying their own massive cargo ships?
Yes. They bought their own cargo ships to transport the finished cars because they don't want to rely on international shipping lines.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because it's easy to look at BYD or look at Western tech giants like Apple and OpenAI, who are furiously trying to design their own silicon and build their own data centers and say, oh, well, they're just scared.
Right, just hedging against policy uncertainty.
Exactly. Hedging against supply chain shocks. But our sources argue this isn't just about fear. It is a cold, calculated monetary strategy. It feels exactly like the robber barons of the 19th and 20th centuries.
Oh, you're touching on the Rockefeller Standard Oil playbook here.
Right.
John D. Rockefeller didn't just want to sell oil. He bought the oil wells, the refineries, the barrel-making factories, and the railroads.
Exactly. But instead of controlling railroads and wooden barrels, today's companies are trying to control the software ecosystem and the raw lithium processing.
Right.
By integrating vertically, they are trying to create a systemic lock-in. If you control the battery, the chips that regulate the battery, and the proprietary software that runs the chips, you aren't just protecting yourself from a trade war. You are cornering the market.
Yeah, you've built an ecosystem where no third-party competitor can survive, and that allows you to extract massive monopoly profits.
Exactly.
The sources identify this as a powerful dual motivation. On one hand, yes, extreme policy uncertainty drives them inward. Relying on an international partner is a geopolitical liability.
But on the other hand,
hoarding the supply chain grants them immense market power. They are building corporate fortresses.
corporate fortresses.
Yeah, and if you are a consumer who cares about the right to repair your own devices or using third-party applications, these corporate fortresses mean you are entirely locked into whatever pricing and rules that single company dictates.
But building these massive, impenetrable corporate and national fortresses has a huge hidden cost.
Oh, it definitely does.
When every nation and company is pulling up the drawbridge, what happens to global problems that don't respect borders? This brings us to the final source in our stack, which asks what happens to the fight against climate change and the push for corporate sustainability.
And the answer is bleak. Gets thrown right on the chopping block.
They're on the block.
This is perhaps the most tragic consequence of the new fragmented order. For the last 20 years, international policymakers were developing a highly sophisticated mechanism to enforce global sustainability.
They called them smart mix policies, right?
Right. The idea was simple but powerful, combine public government regulation with the massive private influence of multinational corporations.
And the pinnacle of this smart mix was supposed to be the European Union's Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or the CSDDD.
Quite a mouthful.
It is. I think of the original draft of this law as a kind of corporate MRI. It was going to force massive companies to scan deep into the darkest corners of their global supply chains.
Right.
If a European clothing brand used a subcontractor in Asia that dumped toxic waste, or a battery manufacturer used a mine with child labor, the European company would be legally and financially responsible.
It was designed to turn corporate giants into a global sustainability police force.
But then the geopolitical reality shifted.
Exactly. As the U.S. and China began heavily subsidizing their own industries to build those economic fortresses, panic set in across Europe.
Oh, big-time panic.
High-level analyses like the Draghi report on European competitiveness started arguing that the CSDDD was no longer a moral imperative, but a massive regulatory burden.
Right. European companies argued that if they had to spend millions auditing their supply chains and faced massive fines for violations, they would be destroyed by American and Chinese competitors who didn't face the same rules.
And they specifically pointed to the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, right?
Oh, yeah. The U.S. strategy was to hand out billions of dollars in green subsidies to companies, essentially a massive carrot. Meanwhile, the EU was preparing to use this massive stick of financial penalties.
Exactly. The fear of losing the geoeconomic race triggered a massive wave of political lobbying. We saw the introduction of omnibus packages designed to gut the CSDDD before it could even take effect.
And they succeeded.
Oh, big time. The final version of the law was heavily diluted.
Wait, so what actually happened to the law? The mechanism of how they weakened it is staggering. Originally, this MRI was going to scan thousands of companies.
Thousands, yeah.
But they raised the threshold so high that the final law only applies to massive corporations with over 5,000 employees and 1.5 billion euros in global turnover.
Which excludes almost everyone.
Exactly. They completely deleted the legal obligation that forced companies to adopt a transition plan mitigating climate change to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And they dropped the maximum financial penalties for human rights violations from 5% of global turnover down to 3%. The teeth were pulled.
So, what does this all mean? We have to ask, is competitiveness a legitimate threat here? Or is it just a highly convenient excuse for corporations to abandon sustainability the moment the global economy gets bumpy?
Well, the source text points out a fascinating historical parallel. There is actually very little empirical evidence showing that strict environmental protection structurally harms national competitiveness.
Right.
The source compares this current panic to the exact same unfounded fears we saw in the 1990s during early environmental regulations.
This raises an important question and really highlights the ultimate irony of our current era.
Which is?
Just as humanity finally engineered a workable legal mechanism to enforce sustainability across borders, using those smart mix policies, the cooperative global order fractured.
Unbelievable timing.
Yeah. Now, the United States is actively pushing aggressive deregulation. The European Union is watering down its landmark climate laws out of sheer geoeconomic panic, and nations in the global south are actively opposing unilateral EU sustainability measures.
Because they view them as a form of green imperialism that stunts their own growth.
Exactly. It is a highly fragmented patchwork. The long-term necessity of planetary survival is being systematically sacrificed to appease the short-term demands of geopolitical posturing.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
let's pull all this together and look at the big picture. We started with this idea that the invisible lines of globalization are hardening into real borders.
They definitely are.
By connecting these four sources, the overarching implication is clear. We have officially entered an era of the post-globalization blues.
The post-globalization blues.
Yeah, the old establishment narrative, that win-win world where economists led the way, it is dead. Today, Trade policy is a multi-purpose weapon.
Yeah.
Garden shares are traded freely, but EVs are guarded like state secrets.
Yep.
Traditional geography has been replaced by political blocks where physical proximity means nothing without political alignment. Companies are abandoning lean supply chains, choosing instead to hoard every layer of production to build monopolistic fortresses. And, perhaps most worryingly, global sustainability and climate cooperation are being sacrificed at the altar of national competitiveness.
It's a profound transformation. What stands out to you listening? Because whether you are a consumer trying to figure out why your electronics are suddenly locked into a specific ecosystem, or a professional trying to navigate a multinational corporate strategy, this shift means extreme policy uncertainty is the new baseline.
Yeah, the rules of the global economy are no longer being written by market efficiency. They are being dictated by raw geopolitics.
Exactly.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we've uncovered today. Throughout this deep dive, we've talked almost exclusively about physical things.
Right, physical good.
We've talked about how electric vehicles, critical minerals like lithium, and advanced ASML microchip machines are being hoarded by these new political fortresses. But think for a second about the invisible resources.
Invisible resources.
Think about global talent. Think about human capital. If we are entering a world where international trust is fundamentally broken and cross-border cooperation is inherently viewed as a security threat, what happens to scientific breakthroughs?
Oh, wow.
If the U.S., China, and the EU throw up high walls, if they stop sharing researchers, stop publishing joint data, and stop collaborating in the lab to protect their own intellectual property, could the post-globalization blues actually put a hard ceiling on human technological progress itself? Are we securing our borders at the cost of our future?
It's a sobering question, and it really shows just how high the stakes are here.
It certainly does. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the shifting global order. Keep questioning the narratives behind the headlines, and remember, the world isn't flat anymore. It's going to be a bumpy ride.